The Newsday continues here on One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. China hits out at the U.S. following the visit of the latter's defense chief, Lloyd Austin, in the Philippines. The Chinese embassy says Washington continues to step up military posture, which escalates regional tension and undermines stability. It also accuses Austin of advancing anti-China political agenda, which contradicts the aspiration of regional countries for peace. The embassy says it hopes that, quote, the Philippines stays vigilant and resists from being taken advantage of and dragged into troubled waters. Austin met with his Philippine counterpart Carlito Galvez, where they both agreed to expand the U.S. military base access in the country. The Philippines and the U.S. have agreed to expand their military partnership with the addition of 4 more EDCA locations. Mobile journalist Julie Baiza tells us more in this report.
The Philippines' future will always involve the United States. This is what President Bongbong Marcos told United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin when the two met in Malacanang.
I would be stating the obvious to say that our longest partner and ally has been the United States. I again put great importance on that partnership, specifically with the United States.
Austin and other U.S. officials made a courtesy call to Marcos, and during the meeting, the president talked about the region's current situation geopolitically and recognized that it would be able to properly navigate it with the help of allies like the U.S. Marcos also thanked Austin for visiting the country, as it is an opportunity to discuss the country's outlook on the current situation in the Asia-Pacific region.
Perhaps exchange some ideas and thoughts and comments and information on the current situation geopolitically and of course more specifically here in the Asia-Pacific region.
Austin, meanwhile, said the U.S. will continue to work with the Philippines as the country is a key ally.
You are a key ally and an important ally, and so from the defense perspective, we will continue to work together with our great partners to build and modernize your capability as well as increase our interoperability.
After his meeting with the president, Austin met with his Filipino counterpart, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. Shortly after, the U.S. Department of Defense announced that the U.S. and the Philippines have agreed to 4 new additional Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement or EDCA sites in the country. The USDND said the United States has allocated over $82 million for infrastructure investment at the existing 5 sites under the EDCA. Currently, there are 5 predetermined EDCA sites, namely the Benito Ebuen Air Base in Cebu, Lumbia Airport in Cagayan de Oro City, Fort Magsaysay in Nueva Ecija, Antonio Bautista Air Base in Palawan, and Dibasa Air Base in Pampanga. Mobile journalist Julie Baiza, We Are One News.
Here to share with us his insights, we have on the show national security expert Romel Banlawi, president of the Philippine Society for Intelligence and Security Studies. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Diego. Good morning to all.
Yes, before we start off, sir, I'd like to ask you, why did it take the Philippines 9 full years to fully implement the EDCA?
Well, that's part of the agreement. We have 10-year agreement to implement the EDCA, and the implementation of EDCA slowed down during the time of President Duterte because President Duterte pursued a paradigm shift towards China in order to promote friendlier ties with China, and he even threatened to separate from the United States when he visited China during his term. And at the same time, he suspended the implementation of the Visiting Forces Agreement, so that significantly delayed the implementation of EDCA as well as the construction activities in 5 locations where the United States are building American military facilities. And now The EDCA is expiring next year, and the United States has expressed intention to extend the operation of EDCA with a plan to also expand the location of EDCA in order to build 5 additional American military facilities in Philippine territories.
Yes, sir. I was looking at the list of the expansion, and how will the Philippines benefit from these new EDCA sites strategically?
Well, there are costs and benefits of those sites. The benefit is that, of course, we will continue be in the list of countries where the United States commit to provide military assistance. As announced by Secretary Austin, the United States is willing to provide more than $80 million for the construction of these facilities. And during the visit of Vice President Harris last month in the Philippines, she also announced the willingness of the United States to provide the Philippines military assistance of $70 million. So those are the benefits, and at the same time, constructions of these facilities will also trigger some economic activities in those areas, and also encourage other economic activities arising from the exercises that the United States intend to do in the Philippines. So those are the economic benefits, but at the same time, there are social costs. Strategically, it will help us prepare for some contingencies in the Taiwan Strait, in the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time, it opens the Philippines greater risks. Because, with American military troops in the country, you will also allow the Philippines to be the magnet of military attack by American adversaries. So those are the consequences of allowing U.S. military presence in the Philippines. We may get short-term economic benefits or maybe short-term strategic goals, but there are also some security risks associated with it, and we need to face those consequences.
Could it be, sir, the risks that you mentioned could also be the presence of the U.S. Troops here could also be a deterrent against the adversaries of the U.S.?
Well, that's the intention. It will provide a deterrence, but as I see, the adversaries of the United States are not even deterred by American military presence, but provoked to counter American presence in the Philippines. Like, for example, let's take, for example, Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda targeted the Philippines. Islamic State targeted the Philippines when the United States launched a war in Afghanistan. We were targeted by Afghan foreign terrorist fighters when the United States launched a war in Iraq. The Islamic State in Iraq also targeted the Philippines and even supported the Marawi Siege of 2017 and several violent activities in the Philippines. Because of American military presence, China also retaliated by constructing and even occupying and fortifying 7 land features within the Kalayaan Island Group, and these 7 land features have military capabilities to counter American military presence in the South China Sea. So the adversaries of the United States are also doing the same thing to counter American military presence in the Philippines. So we need to weigh the situation now, whether we are willing to participate in this growing rivalry between the United States and China in Asia. So the intention was to deter China, but as I observed, China is not deterred. China is even provoked to do greater military actions in order to prevent the United States from what China perceived as strategically encircling China.
That's right.
So that's the current situation now that we find ourselves.
And speaking about China and the U.S., as we all know, during the Duterte administration, we were friendlier towards China, and now we see a pivot in this new administration of President Bongbong Marcos with the visit of several high U.S. officials. Would this not affect now the current foreign policy of our country, and how will this damage or enhance our relationship with China?
Well, right now, of course, our closer ties with the United States would have consequences to our relationship with China. But I currently describe Marcos' foreign policy as a flexible foreign policy that is pursuing greater economic relations with China and at the same time maintaining our security alliance with the United States, because we have security requirements that the United States can provide and we have economic requirements that China can provide. So we are getting the best of both worlds in order to advance our national interest. And I hope that kind of policy will yield positive outcome for our country, but that remains to be seen. So it's really a delicate balancing that the current government is doing, pursuing friendlier ties with China and strengthening our security alliance with the United States. And that has been the case since 1986. We have been doing that, sometimes we tip our relationship towards China, sometimes we tip our relationship towards the United States. So we really have to be cautious, but at the end of the day, the barometer of our actions and our foreign policy decision will be the pursuance of our national interest. So I call that kind of foreign policy as a flexible foreign policy, a bamboo diplomacy, which is currently practiced by many countries in Southeast Asia, especially those countries with greater interest to forge meaningful ties with the United States and China, like Singapore, Thailand, even Indonesia and Malaysia, and almost all countries in Southeast Asia, except those mainland Southeast Asia with greater relationship with China, like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar.
But will the current stance of the PBBM administration mean that we will have more protection in terms of defense security in the disputed South China Sea?
Well, that's our expectation, that we will be protected by the United States, and that's also the promise of the United States, that the U.S. remains committed to defend us if we are attacked. But if the problem is military in nature, but the problem is not yet military in nature. The problem in the South China Sea, it's largely diplomatic and political, and we can find diplomatic and political solution in the South China Sea, and we are trying to avoid that these political and diplomatic problems in the South China Sea will develop into a military problem. That is why we have to pursue preventive diplomacy in order to prevent that kind of military scenario, which is inimical to our interest and also the interest of the entire region and also of the entire world. So we have to face the consequences. If we want to allow the United States to increase its military presence in the Philippines, there will be consequences. And I think China is preparing for some contingencies also to prevent the United States from getting greater advantage. That's the major power game. China wants to have greater advantage, US wants to have greater advantage, and EDCA is allowing the United States to have greater military advantage in Asia, because EDCA allows American access to Philippine territories, especially if the United States faces some problems in the Taiwan Strait, Korean Peninsula, and the South China Sea. So we need to really weigh whether allowing American presence in the Philippines will fully advance our national interest.
And speaking of, last question, sir, speaking of response from China, I think you're familiar with the statement that they released. What do you make of that statement, and should we expect any retaliatory action of sorts from China?
Well, I expect that China will do something to counter American actions in Asia. Because prior to Secretary Austin's visit to the Philippines, he went to South Korea in order to reaffirm its military commitment to South Korea, and China is privy in what the United States is doing in Asia, and China will prepare something for it. And because China now is more confident to really counter the United States, but for me, the greater task for the Philippines is to play a positive role for the development of playing a positive role to enable China and the United States to develop a more constructive and healthier bilateral relationship. Because the future of international security will really rely largely on the directions of U.S.-China relations, and the Philippines, being at the middle, should play a more constructive role and help facilitate the development of better relationship between the United States and China. Because if the United States and China are doing well, that is good for the entire world. But if China and the United States are not doing well, that's bad for the entire world. So the Philippines should be more prudent in allowing American military presence in the Philippines, but at the same time pursuing great relationship with China. We have to learn lessons from the foreign policy actions of Singapore, of Malaysia, and Indonesia, because they are, and also Vietnam and Thailand, because they are navigating between the two major powers. They are getting the best of two worlds also to advance their national interests, and we have lessons to learn from our Southeast Asian neighbors on how to effectively deal with China and the United States without necessarily contributing to the deterioration of regional security situation.
Yes, thank you very much once again, Sir Romel Banlawi, National Security Expert.
Thank you very much, Diego, and have a good day. Mabuhay.
The Pentagon reports that a suspected Chinese spy balloon has been spotted flying over the United States for a few days. This amid tensions between Washington and Beijing over Taiwan and China's military activity in the South China Sea. Washington says it has been tracking the balloon since it entered U.S. airspace a few days back. The Pentagon also reports that the current flight path would carry the balloon over a number of sensitive sites, but did not give any more details. Senior U.S. officials advised President Joe Biden against shooting it down for fear that the debris could pose a safety threat. And those are the top stories of the hour. Join us again at 9:45 a.m. as we continue to monitor the day's biggest stories. You can also catch One News on Signal Play. Register an account now at signalplay.com so you can stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Diego Castro. We are One News, all sides, all the time.